Welcome to all our attendees to the second edition of ListenIn. Today's session, Maker to Market, Resurrecting the Indian Handloom Industry, is going to focus on the challenges to the handloom sector in the light of this pandemic, which is also jeopardizing the fates of millions of weavers. We have with us today three wonderful voices who've agreed to share their expertise with us. Thank you, Pramod, Shalini, and Hemang, for making the time to be with us today. A little bit about today's session. It's been planned in cooperation and in partnership with Eka Resources. Thank you to everyone at Eka and especially to Deepthi. A little bit about the session today. It is going to begin by my colleague Leandre introducing the panelists, and then Pramod will be in conversation with Hemang and Shalini, followed by a question and answer session.
Introduce our panel this evening. Pramod is co-founder of Eka Archiving Services, India's first museum advisory firm. He instituted the Jaipur Lit Fest and is founder director of the Anokhi Museum of Hand Printing in Jaipur. He's also a published author. Among various projects undertaken by Eka, they are also the advisors of the Wendell Rodrigues Moda Goa Museum and Research Center. Shalini Sharma began her career as bureau chief for leading lifestyle magazines like Society, Savvy, Stardust, and has set up India's first luxury magazine, High Blitz. In 2014, she started Angasutra, a luxury fashion store in Hyderabad, showcasing major Indian brands. Hemang Agrawal specializes in handcrafted apparel and handwoven textiles using weaving techniques that are fast disappearing. The label Hemang Agrawal is available in stores in India and abroad. On that note, I invite Pramod to take the lead.
Very much, Leandre. Thank you, Ishita. Thank you to Sunaparanta for making this conversation possible, for allowing a space for concerns that are not immediately apparent to everybody, but are important nonetheless. And the fate of several of our fellow humans in this country and across the world, of course, are affected. But the handloom industry in India is frequently given a lot of token lip service, but very little is done about it. And one of the things I've always felt is the misnomer of calling it an industry, because industry gets the kind of support, financial, governmental, mechanization, things that our handloom industry doesn't necessarily always get in that fashion. So it is a sector at the end of the day. So handloom sector sometimes seems like a far more appropriate way to talk about it. But anyway, moving away from that, I just wanted to give the outer contours of this conversation. We are primarily looking at, so the handloom industry, you can talk about a million things connected to it. We primarily want to restrict ourselves to speaking about handloom in the way we encounter it in our everyday lives, through the three panelists who are speaking, also to give you a sense of the two speakers that I have chosen to be part of this conversation with me are people who delve not just in handlooms, but in non-handloom textiles as well. And the reason I thought they would be apt for a conversation like this is they are able to bring in a commercial aspect and a commercial perspective, which is sustainability, which is crucially important for this sector to go forward. And that is the reason why I wanted this conversation with people who would not only be crying or whinging about this sorry state of affairs, but would give us a positive takeoff on if we have to make this a commercial reality, if we have to make it possible for people to come on board, how do they allow this to go on? And most importantly, and not to forget, is that the pandemic and the lockdown over the last 3 months has put everybody's lives on hold. But I also want to cast an eye on what's happened to the weaver community, what's happened to handlooms particularly, and what are the ways forward once things open up, once we're able to react and look at things in a different way. But yes, I could keep going on, and I'm going to keep peppering this conversation with Shalini and Hemang. But I would like both of them to introduce themselves briefly and give us a sense of their work, especially their work of why they still hold on to doing some bits of it through handloom. Hemang perhaps more so than Shalini, but Shalini at Angasutra still holds on to handloom in a very, very particular way. And I wanted the conversation between retail, the front end where you and I go and acquire textiles, and Hemang at the back end where textiles are manufactured and made. And that's the reason the talk has been called Maker to Market. And so I'm going to ask Shalini to start off by giving us a sense of where does she hold on to handlooms in her daily life, and why is it that it's still part of what they do at Angasutra?
Well, actually I'm from Rajasthan, Pramod, and my grandmother, ages back, started promoting handlooms amongst her friends because she just felt very passionate about the subject. So I grew up seeing my parents, my father and my wearing kurtas, beautiful handloom kurtas. And all the ladies in the family only wore handloom saris forever. And so when I grew up, it was so natural for me to just wear handlooms till I came to Bombay to work and I got distracted by all the rest of the fashion that was available. But at some point, I relocated to Hyderabad, and I cannot tell you, I'm so happy to state this, that Hyderabad has such a rich handloom culture. Like, you can talk to any lady who enters the store, she understands her weaves. You can't fool her. She knows exactly what she wants to buy, and she will look at a sari or she'll look at a cloth and she'll be able to tell you exactly how authentic or not it is. And I respect that kind of knowledge that these women, and they are very ordinary looking ladies. When they walk in, they're simple, but they know their weaves and you can't fool them. And for that reason alone, my store is very particular that when we work with handlooms, we only work with the best. Because you can't pull wool over the eyes of these ladies out here.
Hey, Hemang, you want to give us a shot of why? I mean, I know you are in Banaras. You are in the midst of some of the most important weavers, and it is one of India's biggest major weaving centers. But while I know you do a lot of non-handloom textiles also, why do you continue to hold on to handlooms?
Well, Pramod, to put it simply, as a textile maker, well, there are two aspects to it. One, our company as a textile maker. The second, myself as an apparel maker. As a textile maker, many a times you have to cater to what the client want. And I have seen that changing in last 30, 40 years. When we talk about Indian perspective, obviously you spoke about, you touched upon sustainability. Man as a participant is very important in our understanding of sustainability, but it's not so in the West. In the West, it's more about the environment. Man is only a stakeholder. They are not as, they don't worry as much about human sustainability in terms of work as they do as about human sustainability as livelihoods. So as a textile maker, we have been making a lot of textiles, and obviously when 6 billion people in the world need to be clothed, not all of them can be clothed to handloom. And frankly, I think so that anything which can be made on a power loom should be made on a power loom. Handloom is not for the masses. Handloom is not for making our bulk textiles. We have for the longest time, we as a country have taken pride where handloom is made on an industrial scale. I think so this idea is well past its sell-by date now. Handloom has to remain within the small domain of luxury. If not luxury, premium. I mean, right now we are having handlooms making, fabrics which compete against power loom. I do not see as to how that makes any sense. So that's about us being as a textile maker. For that, we have been, of course, been using a lot of handloom, but a lot of power looms recently. As an apparel maker, because I work in Benares, definitely there are some advantages which probably, I would have, which others do not have, that advantage being in the city. So my objective for the label has been that it should kind of push the envelope, not just of the design, but also of the technique, which we know Banaras as. Many times we confuse Banaras to be a design center, which it is not. It is basically a technique center, a craft technique center. The design is very incidental to it. And that is true for so many of the other craft clusters. So, and there are so many distinct advantages which handloom bring on the table, which has always made me stick to handlooms. But at the same time, as I said, it is not a zero-sum game. Both can very well coexist, and both should coexist. They do not compete against each other in my mind.
So,
Pramod, your mic is on the mute.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute. Yeah, okay. So when you have a lot of buyers coming to you, you've got people, I mean, this goes to both of you, Shalini and Hemang. What is the percentage of people who would sort of automatically gravitate towards handloom, or is that a very specialized audience only who come in? I know that when we go into, say, a craft fair where only handlooms are available, we know what the kind of numbers is because everybody's already pre-programmed to being there because they know it's a handloom fair. Yeah. But what kind of audiences do you get in your spaces?
In my store, at least 50% of them. And actually, our handloom promotions get a lot of traction in terms of the kind of audience they call up. They specifically want to be the first to come there, have the first pick. And what I enjoy are the conversations that we have when the ladies arrive to have a look at it. Each of them has a story about some handloom that she possesses, which she wants to share either with the person who is showcasing the handloom or with the owners of the store or with the other people who are there. So I've realized that actually when you're wearing a handloom, you're not just wearing a piece of fabric which has been woven by a weaver. There is so much of emotion involved to it because it's a family occasion. You know, it's invariably been handed down to either a daughter or you've received it from someone. So there's an emotional palette to handlooms, which I feel as a store owner that we have not really successfully tapped into. And I think it's a conversation I've had in my head during the lockdown that I need to take the handloom and I need to create those stories around them. And I mean, and it's probably going to be our next project.
Hemang.
So Pramod, see, the way I see it, handloom, textiles, it is not about the products. Any craft is always about the process. Now, the problem is that even though a lot of people do care about handlooms, many of them are not aware about the processes. So while they tend to buy something which they think is handloom, it may not be. And that is why this industry is running, because a lot of things get sold in the garb of handloom. But the problem is that because of little knowledge, I mean, I would say at least 90 to 95% of the customer, even though they might be caring for handloom, they do not really know as to what it is. And they're not as discerning to go into the details. So we do get, I mean, it's difficult to put a percentage. We do get a lot of people who are, who want to buy handloom, but it's not necessary that whatever they are buying would be handloom. So it's difficult to put a percentage on that, Pramod.
But I mean, I understand from Shalini's perspective very clearly because she's got retail buyers coming into the store to buy. But in your case, while a store is one part of your business, you also have a lot of export clients who come into you, a lot of others. But for them, is the query usually towards handlooms because they're coming into India, or is it to realize any kind of design that they have and they know that India is a good price point to try and get it done?
Well, Pramod, see now, I mean, if I had to talk geographically, then probably people in Japan, somewhere in Europe would really care as to how this product was made. But the rest of the world, you know, it thinks of handloom more as a commodity. And they are not, as I told you initially, they're not very picky about the process. And anyways, our fascination has always been with designs and motifs. As against the weft, they are not as fascinated with motifs and design for their breadth lines or for their couture lines. For them, it's more about textures. So I don't think so. They care as much about the process behind a handloom. They definitely do care a lot about whether the process has been green. It has been, sustainability for them is about green fashion. Sustainability for us is more about livelihoods. Right. So there is so I wouldn't say that a lot of customers really care whether the product was made on a handloom if you talk about the export lines.
Yeah. So when you spoke, Shalini, about the conversations that you get, what do you think happens online?
No, I'll tell you.
My query is, what do you think happens?
I'm going to speak from a purely, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to speak from a purely fashion point of view because that's the field I'm familiar with. And I have realized that the worst thing that you can do to a handloom product is to put it on a fashion show ramp. I mean, that format just absolutely does not work for it because it is so much more. See, fashion shows one associates with trends. And I don't think that we should be a trend story. It is such an emotional story in the complete ethos, the fashion, the Indian ethos, that to take it and try and convert it into a trend is doing it a big disservice. We need to make it something so intrinsic as part of our story. I mean, the way the Japanese have been able to use the disruption within their textile analogies, the way London uses, the underground, we have to take our handloom and we have to create stories out of it, which has to go beyond the fashion ramp. I have huge issues about that.
So what
I think what happens when you put it on the ramp, Pramod, is that the technology behind that, the history behind the handloom gets lost somewhere. And you're doing a great disservice to the fabric when you do that.
So going back to you, Hemang, now I know that you've taken handloom to the ramp. What do you have to say about that now?
Well, Pramod, it is not a perfect marriage. Let me tell you that. I mean, the way I see it, it's a bit like songwriting as against, it's more about lyric writing rather than compositions. For example, you would have, I mean, when we talk about a movie's music, the music is always composed before, and then you create a lyric according to that. But otherwise, all the poems, the sonnets, they have not been written essentially for a tune. So taking handloom to the ramp, because on the ramp, it has to look, it's all about visual appeals on the ramp, and it's about the garment. So for a ramp, you have to first think of the garment and then you think of the textile. Whereas I mean, the way I work, I always think of a textile first. So though, I mean, we have received a lot of appreciation for what we have been able to do, but I would concede to Shalini that handloom on the ramp is not a perfect marriage. But at the same time, in the world we are living in, where everybody is fascinated with the visuals they see rather than the processes, probably new headways need to be made into this field as well.
So, sorry, can I just add to that? I have to say, I'm very impressed with some of the people who are working in the handloom. They are now using their Instagram or social media to create stories around the work that they're doing in the world of handlooms. And for me, that is so much more impactful than what is happening on the, than trying to put your fabric on the ramp. And I think those are the stories that I look for constantly when I'm on the social media.
So, I mean, it's interesting you bring up social media, because what I wanted to ask was also around the fact that now a lot of your buying and selling is happening on the digital space. Now, what do you do when you lose contact? What do you do when you lose contact with your primary customer, when you and she can't share stories anymore? Because online, when you're purchasing it on a successful online e-platform, that kind of conversation comes to a close. I mean, they may look at the stories of the narrative that you put forward, but is that not something that's going to be sort of a hit and miss at times?
So, this is a really amusing story, I have to tell you. I used to have a house help who was, used to be on her WhatsApp all the time. And then she suddenly one day tells me, I'm going to Surat. I said, why? She says, oh, I'm selling saris, so I need to go and collect the saris. So I said, but you're working in my house. When do you have the time to sell the saris? So she says, I've got this group of people. I keep sending them pictures on WhatsApp. And if they like it, I sell it to them. And they work out some system as to how the sari goes across. And I mean, the saris were like 500, 600 rupees. I'm really amused because honestly, that is what we stores, these high-end luxury stores, are doing today. We are getting our collections, we are photographing them, putting them all on WhatsApp to all our clients, and their conversations going backward and forward as to what they like and, negotiate the rate, whatever that may be, and figure out ways to get it across to them. So, I mean, full credit to Julie, wherever she is. We're doing exactly what she did 5 years back.
But when you have conversations of that kind going on, I mean, don't you think that there's a chance that you may miss out on getting to know what is the pulse of what the audience wants, because you're not physically having any conversations anymore? Hemang, how much of your business is online?
We do have a website, Pramod. We were one of the earlier entrants into selling handloom textiles online. Our site is holybeeps.com, and I'm told that it's one of the larger players in the handloom retail industry. But if you ask me personally, I believe that traditionally the whole commerce around textiles has been more experiential rather than transactional. The problem with online commerce is purely about transactionals. So obviously in the world we are living in, it's very important to have a footprint and a strong footprint at that in terms of digital e-commerce sales. But again, luxury and breadth. When I say couture and breadth, not both of them are attuned as much, equally to online commerce. So for breadth lines, for things which are around the mill, it works perfectly fine on the e-commerce. Some part of for handloom, there has to be this experience bit. It is it's integral to the whole process. So I just hope and pray that that comes back, because right now, obviously, next 3-4 months look to be very tough for that experience kind of retail. But at the same time, definitely there is a move. The world is moving towards online. So let's see as to how even handloom processes can be strengthened so that they merge well with online sales.
So what has really been the condition back home in Banaras for you in the last 3 months? I mean, what has been, I mean, I've heard from friends, I've heard from colleagues, I've heard little bits of it, but I'm sure the audience would really like to know. I mean, Banaras is just endemic of one as an example. I mean, this is a story that is repeated across the country in other centers as well. But we would like to understand through one story, probably what the larger issues across the country are.
Well, Pramod, frankly, for last 2 months, there has been virtually no production on handlooms or any kind of looms for that matter. One sad thing has been that most of the weaving clusters in Banaras have been the hotspots as far as corona is concerned for various reasons. So virtually there has not been, and obviously the local bylaws also have not permitted any kind of activity in those things. So things are now slowly warming up. We are having looms now restarting, recalibrating them. There have been saris which have been left half woven on the loom. So basically, actually, literally, we are picking up the threads again. So it's going to be a while. At the same time, this lack of supply has kind of been compensated by lack of demand. Obviously, there has not been really much demand for last 2-3 months because of the lockdowns. We have had intermittent people inquiring and some shipments. But yes, last 2 months have been a complete closure. And once this kind of a spanner is thrown into a running wheel, it takes a while for it to come back to full strength. So I think so that it's going to take at least a couple of months. If things stay stable from now on, then it's going to take a couple of months for the entire wheel to start moving again.
So not just the weavers, that means every bit of the supply chain must have been affected, from getting the yarn to getting the looms put up.
Yes, every single stakeholder has been, as you said, the whole supply chain has been affected. One integral part of Banaras weaving obviously has been the silk yarn. And you would know that, a lot of people tend to assume that everything silk is about mulberry imported from China, which is not true. It's only some part of the bivoltine silk which comes from China. So obviously there is a sentiment which is going across about not using Chinese products. So at the same time, I don't think so handloom industry in general would be as affected, because we obviously have a lot of intrinsic production in India. And at the same time, a lot of yarn which is used in saris, especially in the weft across India, is not Chinese. So yes, yarn, with the embargoes which are going to be probably in place, yarn not coming from China would have an effect, but that would be a very small effect. So, but yes, you are right. The entire supply chain, right from the yarn to the final consumer, has been affected.
So, for somebody like you, Shalini, what
Yeah.
did you
So what I'm experiencing, Pramod, is now during this time, there's a lot more conversation from our consumers as to what they want to buy. And what I'm getting consistently is that they do feel that they want to tap into the handloom story in a much more focused way than they did before. In fact, I was having a conversation with one of our biggest buyers, and she says she has decided that once the lockdown is lifted, she is going to pick up a fabric from every corner of the country and create her own fashion story out of it. And I'm finding it consistently with a lot of other people. They are looking to reach out to the handloom industry in India and create their own unique story, which is very reflective of what they want, rather than what is fed to them by the fashion magazines.
So just to continue on that thought, Shalini, briefly when we spoke earlier, before this conversation, you had given me some insights about collaborations that have happened with handloom and designers coming into the play.
Yeah, so
I had some feedback on that.
Yeah, sure. So one person who I've always watched very closely is Reena Singh of Eka, because I've always admired the way she's handled her brand. She's somebody who refused to go through the fashion show circuit. When she finished her fashion school, she went and she interned with Archana Shah of Bandage. And what Archana Shah did is that she sends all her interns into the villages. She makes them go and stay there. She makes them work with the weavers to understand the technology, the craft. She makes them eat with the weavers, participate in their festivals with them, so that they really, really understand what the story there is all about. So there is so much of dialogue that happens between the designer and the weaver, which is so important, which is unfortunately missing with all the designers otherwise. You meet a lot of young designers who want to work with handloom, but they want to work with it sitting cushy in their homes in Delhi or Bombay or in their workshop in Noida, which doesn't work. Everyone who has worked seriously and consistently with handlooms tells me repeatedly, there's no other way other than going to the villages and living with the weavers and understanding what they're doing. That is the only way that your story is going to be an authentic story and a consistent story. Because what happens with designers is they think handloom is a trend, they go and they work on something for a short while, and when that story is over, they move away. But what happens to the weavers who have learned a new technology or learned a new way of doing something, hoping that in the long run it is going to give them business? And then they're left high and dry. So, for me, the middle people whom everybody likes to be nasty about, okay, whether it's a Gaurang or it's anybody. But the fact is that they are the people who are giving consistent business to the weavers. And the younger designers are not, because the younger designers are not in tuned into the technology of weaving. Now, whether the fault is with the fashion schools or whether it's lack of interest, I don't know. But look at Reena, look at the way she's handled her whole story. She started off not by doing fashion shows. She decided that she wanted to attend all the international trade fairs. That is where she wanted to be. So she understood what the consumer was looking for. And she would take that feedback and go back to the villages and sit with the weavers. And she created her own story. And today she's been hired by Uniqlo as a design consultant. And when I spoke to her about the Uniqlo experiment, she told me, she says, if through this collaboration with Uniqlo, if Uniqlo itself learns one way to save the environment, can you imagine what an impact that will have throughout the world? So, for me, these are the interesting stories about working with handlooms. You have to, there's no other way. You have to go to the villages and you have to live.
So willing to come in and
understand it. Hemant is so fortunate and blessed that he comes from a family that understands all this.
You've done a lot of collaborations with a lot of different designers, with export units, queries coming to you. How has the experience of collaborations been with you with designers? I know that you yourself are a designer by profession, by training at least. How do you deal and negotiate with this? Because like Shalini says that there are some who really made the journey and the transition and the conversation proper, whereas for a lot of the others, it is just a conversation for a particular period of time.
Right. So Pramod, as a textile maker, we have been fortunate to collaborate with a lot of people, designers, brands in India as well as internationally. As a policy, we do not name the whom we have made collaborations with, because the prerogative lies with the other person. But at the same time, there have been, I've been party to fabulous interventions which people have done. Of course, as far as our country is concerned, because handloom kind of has been in trend for last 4-5 years, we have had a lot of fly-by-night operators who have been wanting to dabble into handloom. But the real major differences, the major change has been made by people who have been at it consistently at the grassroots level. Not just they just didn't want to make a line of garments because everybody's talking about handlooms, because the Prime Minister has been promoting this city as a textile center. But those are the people who have actually been wanting to make a difference to the entire craft. And also they are the people who have understood the traditions which have been going on for the longest times, the cultures which are built around it. And in fact, some of the fabulous work has been done by a few Indian designers. So I would say, yes, so many people wanting to work with handloom has helped, but that has been made a very short-term impact as against people who have been consistently at it. So, and when you talk about the West, I've been lucky to work with some of the great names coming from Japan. And trust me, their approach to design, their approach to textile, throws you totally off your balance, because they bring in thoughts which you never thought are possible. Also, we tend to become too micro in the way we think about textiles. We tend to box ourselves. When somebody who is not within that box comes from outside that box, they bring fresh perspectives. So, and I think so the only way handloom is going to sustain, I always believe that what we call heirloom, there's always that important significance of the time period they were built in. What was an heirloom 40 years ago is not an heirloom today, and won't be an heirloom for after 30 years. So the time during which they were crafted, it is important. So for handlooms to stay relevant, it's very important that new fresh ideas come which do not impact the soul of the craft, but they change the body, they change the end product. That is very, very important. And for the same reason, I have always believed that the real problem of handloom has not been powerloom. It has been bad quality of handloom. So of course, that this is one point which not a people are very happy about when I say that we do not need these many number of handlooms anymore. Because you have to separate the man from the craft. What we need is a craft to be alive. What we need is the traditions to be alive. And if at the same time, if we have people who are not as skilled enough, still weaving on handloom and still producing products which are of middling quality, it's going to do more danger to the handloom craft in general. So yeah, that's my 2 bits on it.
No, I completely hear you. But to come back to what do you think we are likely to do with the industry to get us back on our feet? One of the answers constantly is that the government is going to help us. I was also going through earlier in the day through the handloom census survey that the government publishes every few years. And while it breaks it up into different kinds of sectors, can we keep looking at the government for answers? I mean, what do you think the sector on its own has to do?
See, the way I see it, anything to do with art or craft needs patronage. It's if that patronage comes from commerce, then you will definitely have more commodities happening than real museum pieces or artisanal pieces. So obviously during the olden times, it was the royal households who used to be the patrons. Right now is the turn of the government. If you ask me, I think so the heart of this government is in the right place, but probably they're listening to wrong advices, because their entire focus of what I have seen has been towards creating a market, which is fine. Obviously, you need a market to sell things, but I wish there was more input towards skill upliftment, towards new weavers coming into the fold. If you ask me, Pramod, I do not have a single weaver who's less than 40 years of age. We have lost out on an entire generation of handloom weaving. There are some clusters in the country where new people have picked it up. So for handlooms to survive, we need new weavers coming into the fold who are technically trained, who have some sense of design. We don't have to have, I feel very sad when I see that there have been more marketing initiatives rather than product initiatives. If you're telling a weaver that the only way you can make money is if you become a businessman, then we are probably not sending him into the right direction. We need to tell him that you keep on doing your best work possible, rest will be taken care of. So we need more skill upgradation. We need new weavers coming into the fold. So that is the support which I would seek from the government. Obviously, there have been a lot of NGOs who have been working in this direction, and a lot of them have done very, very good work. But because the government has more powers, it has more funds, I think so it's about time that was set right.
Go ahead, Shalini, you had a point.
I disagree with Hemang. I think anything that works with, you have to work with the government, whether you like it or not, however hard you try, it is going to get tied up in bureaucratic red tape. The person who pushes the project gets posted out, someone else comes in, it's a mess. I mean, we were discussing the other day that Delhi Heart is a classic example, or even those emporiums. If you remember in the old days, the Central Cottage Industries Emporium, how good they used to be. We all used to go and buy all our handicraft or handlooms from there. Where have they gone? Like all government projects, they have petered out. So I feel that the drive has to come from the general shopping person. It has to come from the consumer. If it's not from there, it's from the government. Is going to be some, it's going to be very superficial support where they'll pump in a lot of money, but the gains will be very small at the end of it. So what I feel honestly, Pramod, is the change also has to come from the fashion schools. We have so many fashion students coming out of all these fashion schools with almost rudimentary knowledge of handlooms. It has to be done more seriously. They have to be sent into the field. They have to be made to train with the weavers. That's the only way that we are going to actually co-opt handloom into the main fashion narrative of India.
And when we open up, once the lockdown is over across the country, are there a few steps that you would like to do in your store? I mean, would you be doing things again? I mean, I know that you also have a lot of fashion designers and brands that come to your store, but would you be willing to try something with, say, clusters of handloom weavers, so that when you say that the initiative has to come from the consumer, how does the consumer see it? It can only happen through stores like you or through online portals. Are there plans in the offing for you?
Well, we have been consistently talking with all the designers who have been working with handloom with us. We've been trying to understand what they are going through. Their concern right now is what the weavers are going through. You know, in terms of they don't have any money and they are in remote areas, and there's a sense that they have been left on their own. And I do know that people like Dela Sangvi and all have been taking money from their own pocket and ensuring that the weavers are not suffering. So I think somebody like her, or even the other people that we work with, we are definitely going to support them. And in fact, Bela and I are having a conversation to create something new and to work a certain price line around it, so that in the markets that we are all going to be heading to, it works.
How about you, Hemang? I mean, I heard two interesting bits from you when you spoke. One was on the fact that most of your weavers are in 40 plus. So one is clearly the major issue of not getting younger people getting into the field, which means dwindling hands to do this work, because as these existing weavers grow older, you're not going to have too much production coming out of that. Right. I mean, why do you think, is it just income, or is it because lack of recognition, or they feel embarrassed to do this kind of work?
Higher exercise aspirational for them to come in, as well as the products to be aspirational for people to buy. No sort of charity is going to save this craft. Am I audible enough?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I truly believe that we cannot be charitable. Obviously, I mean, if you ask me, of every single handloom weaver whom we work with, the people who have been making good products, it's an entirely seller's market right now. If you are able to create good things, you don't have to really worry about selling. And that is true for every single of my weaver who's producing good work. I mean, they are always, I mean, even in this time, we have, I mean, their looms are running, obviously, as soon as they can. We do see a temporary dip in the demand, but I'm counting on the resilience of India that will come out of it sooner than later. So I think so. Ultimately, you have to think of the product. You cannot have a bad quality product coming out of a handloom and expecting people to buy just because it is handloom. It cannot be charity from the perspective of a consumer, and even from the perspective of a new people coming to the fold. You can't expect them to be doing it just because their father did it or their grandfather did it. So it has to be aspirational from both sides, from the demand side as well as the supply side.
And do you have any examples of people coming forward who are not from this traditional background wanting to be part of this?
Well, yes. In fact, I think so. In the last 4-5 years, because of the resurgence which we have seen, a lot of people who have not been from this trade, I have been seeing a lot of people, obviously they have not been into the profession of weaving. So not that they can learn weaving at this stage and start, but there are a lot of people who have been joining in as one of the, people who into yarns, people who are into post loom processes. So a lot of people have been joining. So definitely when the wheel of commerce moves, it brings in a lot of more people. But for that commerce to survive, we have to make sure that the art part remains intact. And that's what I meant when I said that we need more government intervention for skill upgradations. As I told Shalini, I mean, I don't think so government has the business of being in the market. And sadly, most of the policies have been geared towards building a market. So we need new skills. We need better skills.
Pramod, I'd like to mention that it's disappointing, but forward to support the handloom industry, the exception being the Tatas. The Tatas for a very long time have been supporting a village in Banaras, and they have actually built, because when they figured out that the next generation does not want to take up weaving, they built a school out there where they encouraged the children of the weavers to have a regular education, but at the same time to imbibe the skills that that the family has had for centuries. I think that's such a great experiment, and I think they continue doing it for 15 years. But then, Tata's is so big, it's at the end of the day, it becomes like a bureaucratic organization. The next managing director who came along didn't see any value to it. He says, we're not making any big money, so why should we continue doing this project? So they kind of pull some of the funding out of it. But I think if industry also knuckles down to doing this, it will be great. Tanishq, I know, runs a store called Tanhira in Bangalore, where they sell handloom products between 5,000 to 10,000 rupees, and it's a huge success.
Just one of the last questions before we break off to take queries from the audiences, and they've already been punching in a lot of queries. The price points that things are being made at, I mean, do you think that is likely to change? Are we still going to be looking at very high end pieces in a smaller quantity, a large mid and a large low base, or do you think all of that is going to change post lockdown because of the impact it's had on the industry?
Okay, so Pramod, definitely we are, because when we talk about handloom specifically, and because most of it caters to luxury, there will be, in the medium term, there will be lesser demand, because a discerning handloom buyer would not really want to buy something cheaper just for the sake of it. As against somebody who wants to buy a kurta or a kurti from one of these corporate chain stores, which is 2,000 rupees, she probably would go and buy something which is 1,500 rupees, 1,200 rupees. But somebody who wants a sari of 40,000, 50,000 rupees, she won't be going and buying something which is 15,000 rupees worth because of, her taste. So definitely in the medium term, I see less of demand, and whatever demand is going to come is going to be in the middle price segment. But at the same time, we are a country which has like 365 festivals. So I'm counting on our festivals, our weddings, our big fat Indian weddings to basically pull us back through, because frankly, that is the mainstay of this entire business.
So come on, Shalini, give us some input on what's going to happen. Are big weddings coming back?
Yeah, no, big weddings are not coming back. Weddings will continue. The 5,000 people weddings are well and truly over for the next 6 months at least. But yeah, so obviously the buying capacity is going to come down tremendously. But what I hope we are going to see, what happened is that sometimes a weave becomes very trendy. And let's say the weave is about 30,000 or 40,000 a sari. When it becomes trendy, the market goes crazy. These whole lot of people come in, there's mass manufacturing going on, and the prices treble sometimes of something. And clearly the weaver is not benefiting. I think what we are going to see post-lockdown when we start shopping is that even if a certain weave becomes trendy, people are not going to be going berserk and paying any price to get their hands on it. I think there's going to be a more level playing field, a more ethical playing field when it comes to pricing.
So one of the first queries that has come our way is, what about modernization of the craft, working towards assisting the artisans and educating them to create products that are timeless and more in tune with consumption patterns? Now, I basically have a problem with in tune with consumption patterns, because I do feel that a lot of people will have different kinds. Some, of course, are people who follow other people, but there are lots of people who have their own independent taste choices. So do you think something like that is likely to happen? I mean, are we likely towards working to assist and educate and create new kinds of products, or is the timeless quality going to continue?
Pramod, I feel our weavers are fantastic. If you go and sit with them and you actually work consistently with them, they will give you exactly what you're looking for and maybe a lot more. I have a problem not with the weavers. The weavers know their craft. If you sit with them, they know how to evolve it. I have a problem with the design fraternity. They are not coming up. They are not willing to go out of their comfort zone and sit with the weavers and actually have serious dialogues with them. How is this industry going to move forward? It's not the weavers. It's not. So when you're talking about modernization of weavers, it has to come from the design fraternity. They have to sit and they have to be serious. They have to be willing to take that bus or train journey and go and sit in the villages and work with them.
Hemang.
See, Pramod, Banaras, for example, when I speak about Banaras textile, they are well considered to be one of the most advanced handloom textiles anywhere in the world as of today. Now, all these textiles are woven on a jacquard loom. There is no longer what a Naksha Jala loom used to be. Now, 100 years back, this was the newest technology, which was there. So right now we don't even think of jacquard attachment as a technology, which is actually is. So we have to move with the times as far as your production techniques are concerned. I think so that it is very, I have a problem with the term modernization, like I have a problem with the term revivals. Everybody and their uncle has been trying to revive their crafts, and so many people taking credits for this. So I have a big problem with that. So I don't think so handloom needs any revival. uh, as to what Shalini said, the weavers know their job, which is to weave. They have skill in their hands. Is that what we need? And it's the job of the designers to give them designs or give them products to be made which are in sync with the times we are living in today. I wouldn't say it's not happening, but yes, we need more interventions like that. So I think so. Yes, I mean I don't think so that shying away from modern technologies is really a good thing to have. You have to move in. So many good things are coming in. I mean, we used to have back in the day. We used to make all our graphs by our hand, but now the computer aided designings, it helps you in so many ways. So I think so, yes, that is required, but you can't really be changing the soul of the craft. That has to remain intact. I mean, because as I said, the world is going visual. So if you just digitally print something like any piece of textile, virtually it will look the same from a distance of few feet away. But that's not the craft. The craft is always in the process, not in the visuals.
So it's interesting you made that last point, because one of the other questions I've got is, and if I'm looking left or right, it's because I'm looking at different chat windows with the queries. Somebody's queries is, in my sari buying experience, the machine-made saris are beautiful, but the aesthetics, geometry of the motifs is lost. It seems like there is a disconnect between the people who design the machine and the weavers. How does one integrate that so that the difference is minimal? So this is pretty close to what you were speaking about, Hemang, where you can produce a lot with the machine, but if you don't have a sense of scale, whereas here the blame has gone to the machine maker, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's also to do with the pattern maker who's made the design, going by feedback, has elongated, expanded the scale of the motif and not understood what needs to be done.
It's more to do with the design maker or the motif maker rather than the machine itself. Machine tells you, I mean, it will do what you tell it to do. The problem is never ever with the machine per se, but it's about what you feed in. If you punch a wrong design, you can't really be blaming the machine for it. And again, I don't think so that, Powerloom produces beautiful textiles. If you go to Japan, the kind of, for example, Shalini, you touched upon Uniqlo. If we take about names like Isse Miyake, whom we have had the good fortune to learn from, they use powerlooms in ingenious ways. So the problem is not with the technologies, handloom being pitted against powerlooms. Both of them will do what you tell it to do. And if you tell, garbage in and garbage out, it's as simple as that.
And that brings it also to the point you made earlier, Shalini, about the fact that maybe something needs to go on in the design education so that they realize that it's not about creating an outsized pattern or a minuscule pattern. How do you put it out there?
It's the only way to go forward, Pramod. I mean, if the design fraternity thinks that they can handle handloom, remote control, sitting in air-conditioned rooms, it's not happening. You have to get onto the field. I also want to touch upon the fact, carrying on with what Hemant said about powerloom. And honestly, I think it's very important that we start looking at powerloom positively. Handloom, like he said, is always going to be a niche buy. But if you want the handloom story to get stronger or to reach out to many more people, there's no other way to do it but the powerloom. So there's a different approach. What happens with crafts? There's also the marrying craft to fashion. Fashion always looks down upon craft as an old-fashioned fuddy-duddy thing that they have to work so hard to modernize or to make it cool. On the other hand, even craft has its own intellectual snobbery. So it's very important that designers are able to marry the two and create a new story. And I'm looking for those stories, really. It's about time. We have so much to give. Look at our millions of skilled artisans. What are we doing with them?
No, that's very well put. So one of the other questions we've had is, with the reality of no production, how much worse or better do you see this becoming for the handloom sector and the other stakeholders, of course? What points of recovery look like it to be in this timeline over the next few months, or is it spilling over to 2021 by the time we get back? I mean, I hesitate to say get back to normal because everybody's normal is different. But yeah, what time frames do you think? I mean, this is an open-ended question. It need not hold true for anything because we don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks again.
As I said, Pramod, in the beginning, that we as a country have taken the industrial scale of our handloom production as a badge of honor. I think so because of the pandemic in last 2 months, that's about to change. And I think so that change is warranted. So I won't be too worried if number of handlooms, functioning handlooms go down. You know, I would be happy that even if we have 10% of the total handlooms we have in the country, as long as all 10% of those handlooms are producing artisanal work. So now about the timelines, I think so it's going to take at least 6 months for things to even settle back to any kind of normal, whatever normal that might be. But yes, once the festive season approaches, you'll automatically have more walk-ins to the stores all across the country. You'll have more work coming the weavers' way, but not before our winter festive season.
A very interesting question that's come up, which you may want to take, Shalini. What do you think about design schools that are that are started by handloom craftspeople?
Yeah, I've heard of one person who's doing that. I think it's a brilliant idea. I wish there would be many more of that. Honestly, fashion in India has now just become so scattered, and sometimes I feel irrelevant. I feel so disappointed. I get so many collections. I have about 40 to 50 designers I retail, out of which there are just about 15 designers who are doing well. The others 25 are not being able to sell because they are, so trapped in, I don't want to get into copying others, but there's nothing fresh or new coming out. And I think the reason is that they're all looking for inspiration in the wrong places. If they turn into our traditional arts and crafts and they gave it a new narrative, I can see people wanting to buy into that. So yeah, I am just hoping there'll be many more schools which teach students to understand the technology behind our crafts and our looms.
I have a take on this, Pramod.
Sure, go ahead.
It's probably a topic for another day, but I think so. The stores, which Shalini is a store owner, but the fashion retail stores in the country are also a part of the problem. Designers not being able to do probably what they set out to do. Some blame also lies with the stores, the model on which they work. So as I said, it's a discussion for another day. But a store.
Hemant, I want to come in there. I agree with you completely. I think just as a lot of other things have become very dated, I do think that the models on which the luxury stores in the country are operating on is, and that's a conversation that I have been having right throughout the lockdown, that how do we move forward from this?
And
so like you said, it's a conversation for another day, but you're absolutely right. We need to change the way we are working.
One more query that I've got, which is kind of interesting, is when they have sort of given a pun back to our conversation, maker to market, they've asked, do you think there's a space for the need for a mentor to step in here to help the maker and the market to create some things? Whereas at the same part, the other part of the question is that why do we need middlemen? And I think Shalini's answered that very well by saying that in these 3 months, it is the middlemen who really took care of a lot of their weavers by supplying them with money, whatever they needed, because the end customer was nowhere in the picture.
Yeah, this bad mouthing of middlemen, men or women, has to stop. Because it is these middle people who have been feeding the weavers for years, who have handheld them, who give them consistent feedback as to what the market is looking for. If today some of the weavers have homes and have been able to educate their children, it is because of these middle people. And it is very easy to sit and say, remove the middleman, but then what happens to the weaver? Are you as a person willing to go and sit in the village and work with the weaver 365 days of work year and ensure that he gets consistent work? If you cannot, do not thrash the middleman.
See, it is not a binary question when you talk about that. The way I see it, that if you're not the weaver and if you're not the wearer, then you are a middleman or a middlewoman. So for that matter, every designer, every master weaver, every store owner can be classified under this large bracket of middlemen or middlewomen. The problem is, trust me, it's not these people, but within these people who are not adding any value to the entire chain, who are only there for a quick buck, and we have a lot of them as well. They are the problem. You cannot be using a term which I consider derogatory as a middleman, because trust me, all of us sitting here, including Suna Pranta, including Pramod, including Shalini, including me, all of us are middlemen. We are not weaving ourselves and we are not wearing it ourselves. So there are a lot of people whom you need in this value chain, and there are a lot of people you could actually do away with. So, and to come back to your question about mentor, I think so, I don't think so that, you need any mentor per se. It has to be organic. The entire process has to be organic. You can't really be having somebody else to come in and tell you as to how this thing moves. Obviously, you need people with domain knowledge to tell you about right things, whether it is about production, whether it's about retail, whether it's about design. But you don't really need a mentor per se.
One last question, which seems very pertinent, is can women weavers be empowered in this trade? Do we have, there are a lot of, people may not be aware, but there are a lot of women in the weaving industry, not necessarily always on the looms, but in allied and ancillary bits of the trade. But Hemang, do you want to take that question first?
Well, people will be surprised to know that, approximately 95% of the weaving workforce in the world is in India, and more than 80% of Indian weavers are actually women. So it's not a question which is valid, only because what we think of handloom saris to be, they are made on a sort of a loom which needs a hand span of more than 45 inches, where the shuttle is thrown by hand. But in many weaving traditions of the country, the shuttle is not thrown by hand, and women are actually equally equipped to do that. So in fact, just very close from Banaras, there's a district called Mubarakpur, where saris which resemble, they are made on a hand loom, and they are made on what we call a fly shuttle loom, and they are made by women. So women are not just into the pre-loom or the post-loom process. The act of weaving itself, our primary weavers are the women folk.
So Pramod, I just wanted to make one last comment about this whole fashion and handloom story. I'll just give you an example. Like, we are in Hyderabad and we're surrounded by amazing weaving clusters in Telangana. A very famous fashion designer decided that he was going to do his next collection was going to be based on a certain weave. So he came to us and he says, can you put us onto some of the weavers? We said, sure. And we went along with the designer to go and meet the weavers. The weavers listened to this designer. He's very famous. They were very happy to have him over and they all took pictures with him. But when it came down to business, they turned around and told him, we are not going to do your next collection. We can't give it to you. He says, why? He says, no. So the middleman that we're talking about, the entire weaving had been, the cluster had been taken over by Gaurang. They say Gaurang has been the middleman, but he has been with us for so many years. He has given us work. And he has given us enough work for the next 1 year. We are not going to leave his work and come with you, however famous you may be. So fashion needs to understand their place in the handloom ethos of India. And they have to work to change that. The change has to come from there.
That's very well said, Shalini. One last point, there was a question on where do we get authentic statistical data or on the handloom industry. As we mentioned earlier, there is a wonderful online resource, which is the Indian handloom industry's 4th All India Handloom Census 2019-20. It's published by the Ministry of Textiles. It's an online PDF, so it's fairly easy to get information. It's got a wealth of statistical detail. Some of it I don't completely understand, especially the bits where they've broken the communities down to caste commodities. They've broken it down to religious things because they realized, that is probably a governmental way of looking at how to support certain communities, and they probably need that data. I always fear that sometimes these data could be misused and misread. But anyway, thank you, Shalini, and thank you, Hemang, for being part of this conversation. I'm going to give it back to Ishita to take it
thank
forward.
you so much. Thank you, Pramod, Hemang, and Shalini, for your time, and also for your openness and your pure honesty in answering and disagreeing with each other as much as you agree. It was really nice to hear different points of view. I am going to ask one question which came in actually from a young student, so I'm hoping you'll have time for that, who wanted to understand what is the effect of GI tags on fabric. That's for all our attendees, that's a geographical indication tag, not a glycemic index tag.
Hemang, do you want to take that first?
Promote geographical identification. It is, I mean, as a concept, it works. But if I translate that to whether it is working as far as India handloom industry is concerned, the sad answer is no. Because strangely, I mean, for example, a Banarsi sari, you know, you will have more saris being touted as Banarsi saris coming out of Surat than coming out of Banaras.
Yes.
So it's not, as a concept, it's a wonderful concept, but I don't think so that it has been acted upon on the ground the way it is supposed to be. I don't think so there are proper laws which support it. I don't think so that, there is, so to say, any kind of penal provisions if anybody is doing that. So we have had jamdanis being woven across India where it has to come from a certain province in Bengal. Doesn't happen. Banarsis can only be woven in Banaras. It doesn't happen. So as a concept, it's nice, but as far as execution, it's a pie in the sky.
Yeah, and just to add an important point there, and I'm glad Hemang mentioned Jamdani. Do remember that when Jamdani went to UNESCO for an intangible cultural heritage tag, the proposal was submitted by Bangladesh. So Bangladesh actually owns the GI for Jamdani, whereas a lot of Jamdani is not just done in Bengal, but across India, the coastal parts of the Coromandel Coast down to Tamil Nadu, other parts of India, Jamdani in several formats is done. Even Tanda, which is close to Banaras, where Hemang is seated, has a Jamdani tradition. So Jamdani is woven across the country, across the subcontinent, yet Bangladesh officially has the GI tag. So we need to know that, like Hemang said, it is important to know where these probably originated, but we may not be able to pin it down unless you've got laws to support it. This is pretty much like the copyright laws in the design field. When, and this again, Hemang mentioned, when a famous designer puts out a Banarasi red sari and says that they have revived the wedding sari of India, whereas every weaver in Banaras is like, what do you think I've been doing for the last 80 years? So these are all lovely concepts, but yes, they need to be tinged with a bit of reality, and unless you have the fallback option of the law providing for it, you may not be able to take cognizance of this.
Super. Thank you so much. And thank you to all our attendees as well for making the time to be with us. Thank you again, Shalini, Hemang, and Pramod. And thank you to Eka.
Thank you, Pramod. Lovely chatting with you, Hemang.
Thank you, Shalini. Thank you, Pramod. Thank you, Ishita and Sunapranta. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunapranta.